Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So, let's get going. When he was very much interested, he often spoke quite broad Yorkshire, though at other times he tried to modify his dialect so that Mary could better understand. But she loved his broad Yorkshire, and had in fact been trying to learn to speak it herself. So she spoke a little now. "Aye, that we mun," she said, which meant, "Yes, indeed, we must." "I'll tell thee what us'll do first," she proceeded, and Dickon grinned, because when the little wench tried to twist her tongue into speaking Yorkshire, it amused him very much. "He's took a gradely fancy to thee. He wants to see thee, and he wants to see Sut and Captain. When I go back to the house to talk to him, I'll ax him— no, we don't say ax— him if thou canna come and see him tomorrow morning. And, Anne, bring the creatures with thee. And then, in a bit, when there's more leaves out, and happen a bud or two, we'll get him to come out, and thou shall push him in his chair, and we'll bring him here and show him everything." When she stopped, she was quite proud of herself. She had never made a long speech in Yorkshire before, and she had remembered very well. "They mun talk a bit of Yorkshire like them, that to Mester Colin," Dickon chuckled. "That'll make him laugh, and there's no as good for ill folk as laughing is. Mother says she believes as half a hour's good laugh every morning would cure a chap as was making ready for typhus fever." "I'm going to talk Yorkshire to him this very day," said Mary, chuckling herself. The garden had reached the time when every day and every night it seemed as if magicians were passing through it, drawing loveliness out of the earth and the boughs with wands. It was hard to go away and leave it all, particularly as Nut had actually crept onto her dress, and Shell had scrambled down the trunk of the apple tree they sat under, and stayed there looking at her with inquiring eyes. But she went back to the house, and when she sat down, close to Colin's bed, he began to sniff, as Dickon did, though not in such an experienced way. "You smell like flowers and fresh things," he cried out quite joyously. "What is it you smell of? It's cool and warm and sweet, all at the same time." "It's the wind from moor," said Mary. "It comes a-sitting on grass under a tree with Dickon and with Captain and Sut and Nut and Shell. It's the springtime and out of doors and sunshine as smells so gradily." She said it as broadly as she could, and you do not know how broadly Yorkshire sounds until you have heard someone speak it. Colin began to laugh. "What are you doing?" he said. "I never heard you talk like that before. How funny it sounds." "I'm giving thee a bit of Yorkshire," answered Mary triumphantly. "I canna talk as gradely as Dickon and Martha can, but thou sees I can shape a bit. Doesn't thou understand a bit of Yorkshire when thou hears it? And a Yorkshire lad thysel, bred and born. I wonder thou'rt not ashamed of thy face." And then she began to laugh too, and they both laughed until they could not stop themselves, and they laughed until the room echoed, and Mrs. Medlock, opening the door to come in, drew back into the corridor and stood listening amazed. "Well, upon my word," she said, speaking rather broad Yorkshire herself, because there was no one to hear her, and she was so astonished. Whoever heard the like? Whoever on earth would have thought it? There was so much to talk about. It seemed as if Colin could never hear enough of Dickon and Captain and Sut and Nut and Shell, and the pony whose name was Jump. Mary had run round into the wood with Dickon to see Jump. It was a tiny little shaggy moor pony, with thick locks hanging over his eyes, and with a pretty face and a nuzzling velvet nose. He was rather thin with living on moor grass, but he was as tough and wiry as if the muscle in his little legs had been made of steel springs. He had lifted his head and whinnied softly the moment he saw Dickon, and he had trotted up to him and put his head across his shoulder, and then Dickon had talked into his ear, and Jump had talked back in odd little whinnies and puffs and snorts. Dickon had made him give Mary his small front hoof and kiss her on her cheek with his velvet muzzle. "Does he really understand everything Dickon says?" Colin asked. "It seems as if he does," answered Mary. "Dickon says anything we'll understand if you're friends with it for sure. But you have to be friends for sure." Colin lay quiet a little while, and his strange grey eyes seemed to be staring at the wall. But Mary saw he was thinking. "I wish I was friends with things," he said at last. "But I'm not. I never had anything to be friends with, and I can't bear people." "Can't you bear me?" asked Mary. "Yes, I can," he answered. "It's funny, but I even like you." "Ben Weatherstaff said I was like him," said Mary. "He said he'd warrant we'd both got the same nasty tempers. I think you are like him too. We are all three alike, you and I and Ben Weatherstaff. He said we were neither of us much to look at, and we were as sour as we looked. But I don't feel as sour as I used to before I knew the Robin and Dickon." "Did you feel as if you hated people?" "Yes," answered Mary without any affectation. "I should have detested you if I had seen you before I saw the Robin and Dickon." Colin put out his thin hand and touched her. Excuse me. "Mary," he said, "I wish I hadn't said what I did about sending Dickon away. I hated you when you said he was like an angel, and I laughed at you. But perhaps he is." "Well, it was rather funny to say it," she admitted frankly, "because his nose does turn up, and he has a big mouth, and his clothes have patches all over them, and he talks broad Yorkshire. But if an angel did come to Yorkshire and live on the moor, if there was a Yorkshire angel, I believe he'd understand the green things and know how to make them grow, and he would know how to talk to the wild creatures as Dickon does, and they'd know he was friends for sure." "I shouldn't mind Dickon looking at me," said Colin. "I want to see him." "I'm glad you said that," answered Mary. Because... Quite suddenly it came into her mind that this was the minute to tell him. Colin knew something new was coming. Mary was so anxious... Oh, sorry. "Because what?" he cried eagerly. Mary was so anxious that she got up from her stool and came to him and caught hold of both his hands. "Can I trust you? I trusted Dickon because birds trusted him. Can I trust you? For sure. For sure," she implored. Her face was so solemn that he almost whispered his answer. "Yes, yes. Well, Dickon will come to see you tomorrow morning, and he'll bring his creatures with him." "Oh, oh!" Colin cried out in delight. "But that's not all," Mary went on, almost pale with solemn excitement. "The rest is better. There is a door into the garden. I found it. It is under the ivy on the wall." If he had been a strong, healthy boy, Colin would probably have shouted, "Hooray, hooray, hooray!" But he was weak and rather hysterical. His eyes grew bigger and bigger, and he gasped for breath. "Oh, Mary," he cried out with a half sob. "Shall I see it? Shall I get into it? Shall I live to get into it?" And he clutched her hands and dragged her towards him. "Of course you'll see it," snapped Mary indignantly. "Of course you'll live to get into it. Don't be silly." And with that, we actually come to the end of the reading, because we don't, as usual, have time to start a new page. Yeah, there we have it. Another episode done. Another one done. I have just remembered I need to work out which paintings we've still to do at some point. So I need to find the last time we did a painting, because it's buried at the bottom of the stack and I have no ideas anymore. But anyway, I will say thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.